I was starting to get cabin fever. The surrounding plains and mountains were crying out to be explored, but without any food, my safe travel range was limited. My hopeful farm was still very much in its youth, and just about producing enough food to sustain me ambling around the homestead. Perhaps Nellie had a solution hidden somewhere in her pages. It was useful to know what ingredients I was missing, as well as what I could make. Together, we sat down and started to tease out what we could. I was surprised at just how much Nellie had remembered. I'd been picking up any odds and ends I could get my hands on, and in turn, her pages were overflowing with recipes for all sorts of things. I didn't know where to begin, started crafting things I had no reason to. Although Nellie enjoyed it at first, the weighty load of directionless frilum fancy exhausted her. I made various blocks with dirt, oars and metal, unravelled some of the mysteries of gunpowder, and experimented with dyeing wool. By the time I had honoured my first pickaxe by framing it above the door to the bunker, Nellie was fast asleep. Instead of spending another day aimlessly crafting, I focused on more productive outlets whilst I waited for the crops to grow. Instead, I finished the roof of the well, made a cobbled path, and set out the composter I had made while lost in the savannah. Even after I'd used all the Arcadia saplings in the composter, it didn't fill up. Still twiddling my thumbs, I wandered around and to my surprise found a few emeralds right next to me on the plateau. I had had enough and couldn't wait around any longer. If I was more careful than before, I could safely range the local area and be back before dark. Unlike my long journey here and the recent incident where I got lost, this time I needed to know where I was and also know how to get back. I headed out, in the same direction that I had got lost before, but this time noticed a striking entrance to a dingy cave. But for now, the sun was already setting and I doubled back before I got disorientated. The steep slope slowed me down and it was already night time when I got in. The next morning I didn't waste any time and set off at first light, east towards the rising sun. Knowing how difficult the landscape had been to traverse the night before, I noted down a few landmarks. There was the lava pool on the way to the cave, but you could only see it from one side of the hill. From the other side, a distinctive outcropping of dirt shaped like a cross marked the way back home. From the local high point, I could see Welcome Peak, with its little brother to the southeast. Then even further east, there was what looked like a smaller mountain. Or was it just far away? Then finally, from my vantage point, there was a more plump mountain that sat by the sea as the coast curved round. I was calm and collected as I descended the dirt slope. On approaching the cave, I could hear that it was home to a host of creatures. The monsters must hide in caves like this one during the day, only to venture out at night in the safety of darkness. I saw that the cave I'd spotted opened out into a sort of atrium, and a second entrance was guarded by 2 spiders. I'd noticed that some spiders were happy for me to mosey past, but these ones were protective of their nest and attacked. I was lucky enough that by the end of my sword, the spiders dropped a handful of string. I wonder if Nellie would be feeling a bit more chipper later. The first entrance to the cave I'd spotted the day before was suspiciously inviting. Cautiously, I entered. My torches invaded the darkness of the cave, marking my progress and shielding my back. In these narrow tunnels, I ensured to place my torches on the left-hand walls. That way, if I got lost, I could follow the tunnel, keeping torches on my right, knowing it must be the right way. Hopefully in a pinch I would remember that. And I'd never been so distrustful of this part of the cave, as inside the short tunnel, all I found was a single zombie and a vein of coal. Feeling like a conqueror, my spirit was soon shaken by the sight of the setting sun. Without knowing the quick way back, I was not close to home. I stumbled up the incline, barely being able to see a few steps ahead. Wrong decisions hurt on that slant. It took a while for them to find me, but in the end, the monsters appeared. I was stuck climbing over these muddy slopes. Dodging and fighting my way through the hills, I frantically looked for the way back. My delight in spotting the dirt cross soon turned to terror as I looked down straight into the face of danger. Past the hordes and through a volley of arrows, I slipped by. At night, these lands were theirs. The close call reiterated the need to either have food or a better sense of time. It would also be helpful to know a quick way to navigate through these winding hills I had lovingly named the Dirty Slopes. The day's spoils included a pile of coal, some string and a spider's eye. I couldn't be happier. Nellie was wide awake and overjoyed to make a fishing rod we'd both had our eyes on for some time. Our spark for crafting was back. Before bed, I reviewed all the tools I was carrying and decided that I wouldn't need to replace the spare axe, shovel or sword once they'd broken. My deep pockets were beginning to fill. I was surprised and elated to find that I had a visitor. A merchant had made the journey to my home. He had either seen the glow of my homestead at night, or the local villagers had pointed him in my direction. Perhaps they were friendlier than I thought. Most of what the merchant had to sell I had no use for, but one thing caught my eye. He told me that the tropical fish would cost 5 emeralds. I was too short. After politely asking the gentleman to wait a moment, I hurriedly searched the rest of my plateau, and I couldn't believe it. How much wealth was I sitting on? Not only did I come across more emeralds with ease, but I noticed the crack in the side of the rock opened into a vast chasm that might contain all manner of things. With the required emeralds, I shook the merchant's hand and proudly took the bucket containing the fish. Immediately, I began work on a pool for our new friend. The basement of the farmhouse may not have been the most hygienic place, but she did seem contented. Now that the farmhouse had a responsibility to protect the little fish, I had to rethink security. As I suspected, the irrigation might be used to enter the basement, and I didn't put it past a sneaky creeper to try it out. I hadn't envisioned the need for a security gate in the kitchen. It was good to see the sugarcane and pumpkins growing well, and with some of the excess produce, I revisited the composter. The sugarcane worked much better than the saplings did. Once filled, the composter produced some bone meal. I then realised that bone meal could be used as fertiliser. I hadn't begrudged myself for not knowing that, but it was silly of me not to realise that much of my planted wheat was actually fully grown. I was expecting it to be taller, but seeing as I had only just recently watched a farmer in one of the villages harvest their own wheat, I could only admit that I had indeed been foolish. Inspired, I used ample amounts of the bone I had collected to rapidly grow my crops. Upon harvesting, I found that much of the wheat landed on the tilled soil I couldn't reach. Also, some of the pumpkins were invading each other's space. Once again, I started a redesign. I couldn't tread on the soil without risking trampling it, but the dirt I could step on. Pumpkins would happily fruit onto dirt, and sugarcane would happily grow on it. It took me the rest of the day, and some of the next, but I carefully weaved the pumpkins and the sugarcanes into the lines of wheat, ensuring that each pumpkin plant would only be satisfied growing one way. Now, if any of the produce missed the irrigation system and landed in the middle, I could hop into the stream and get out without having to swim against the currents or trample my crops. I was pleased with the change up to the farm, but perhaps I was being fussy. I had also replaced the wood underneath my front door with cobblestone, and even then I couldn't decide if I wanted the door hinges on the inside or the outside. This is what happens when I stay at home for too long. With that sentiment, I decided that it was time. I cooked up some pumpkin pie and, for the first time, bread to take with me. Despite longingly glazing over a cake recipe for days now, I was disappointed when I realised I had never collected enough milk and still couldn't make it even with my new bushels of wheat. What I could and did make was an iron chest piece to match my helm. I was sure to meet plenty of foul beasts when I returned to the caves. Since heading back and forth over the dirty slopes a number of times, I've been trying to think of a way to make the journey safer and easier. For now, the best solution I had was to mark an adequate path with waypoints, where a torch on the waypoint indicated the way to the next, and finally to home. That took me a while, and I still wasn't sure if it was going to work. By the time I reached the cave, it was pitch black. I should have known by now to only start a trip first thing in the morning. It wasn't long before the monsters descended on me, and in the face of such adversity, bravery failed me. It would take more than excitement and curiosity to be a true adventurer. Instead of standing my ground, I fled. I just about avoided panicking, in part because the waypoints actually did work. The slopes were still steep to climb, but they had pointed out a path less treacherous than others through the hills. When I got back home, I tucked into the last of my bread that I had only made earlier that day. With all the trips over the slopes, it hadn't lasted me long. In the safety of my home, I teased the monsters outside that had followed me back as I chomped into my supper. When the gnome zombie leapt through my window, I was so startled I almost choked. I became even more alarmed as two more of the blighters followed, and I swiped at them as they chewed on my ankles. In my new iron suit, I wasn't going to be their dinner. And for 2 out of the 3 of them, I was right. I wasn't sure what the returning merchant must have thought of me the next morning. My plateau was teeming with monsters, and in my vengeance, I tore across it, hacking them down. Ferocity was a new look on me, but the merchant didn't know that. Also, not knowing what happened the night before, I must have come across as quite the brute. He didn't hang around another day, and I can only hope that my reputation hadn't been tainted. After avenging myself, I was filled with adrenaline and determination. I was going to make that cake. I was going to prepare enough food, no matter how much bone meal it took. I was going to explore that cave. In my preparations, I noticed that my copper block had oxidised and turned blue. How long have I been planning this trip? Perhaps fortifying the windows could wait until later. I'm sure that decision won't come back to bite me. I patiently waited until morning, said goodbye to fish, and ventured out. So it was that I stood in the jaws of the cave, supplied with ample food and provisions, and armoured in heavy iron, finally ready to delve into the darkness. As I stared at my metaphorical foe, a set of bright pink eyes stared back. For all my preparation, I found myself crossing the dirty slopes once again. So when I was trying to climb back over the dirty slopes at night, there was actually very bright sunlight on my computer, so I could genuinely barely see anything, but I didn't want to turn up the brightness in case it affected the recording. Whilst editing this one, I was getting just as pernickety as Fool did this episode. I realised I said lava pool instead of lava stream, and I also said shooked instead of shook. I need to relax, I think. Also, see if anyone can spot the hidden creeper in the episode. I didn't notice it when I was playing, and I got really lucky not to die, actually, by the looks of things. I hope you enjoyed.